Welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. Why are there still so few women who are working in technology roles today? What holds women back from moving into these key roles, whether it's tech, marketing, the C-suite, or any other field? What's holding women back? Is it a fear of not being perfect enough because society has encouraged them to play it safe? Or is it a lack of bravery and a mindset that needs to change? Reshma Saujani is the author of the international bestseller Brave Not Perfect, the founder and CEO of Girls Who Code, as well as the author of the New York Times bestseller Girls Who Code, Learn to Code and Change the World. She's been named by Forbes as one of the most powerful women changing the world, and she's also a TED Talk speaker. And on this episode, we'll discuss a bravery mindset, creating time for yourself, coding and computational thinking, gender parity in the technology workforce, juggling hundreds of speaking engagements a year, gender versus age, how managers and mentors can help empower women without being patronizing, changing the world, and a lot more. So let's tune into a brave, not perfect author and speaker with a brave and far from perfect shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Reshma, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would tell us a little bit briefly about your background and your career to date.
Oh gosh. So I am the founder and CEO of Girls Who Code.
Yeah.
And I always say I'm a totally weird person to have built this movement because I'm not a coder. My father would sit me on the dinner table when I was little and be like, what's 2 plus 2? And I would say 5. And so it was very clear that I wasn't going to have a technical career. But I've always been really passionate about public service because my parents came here as refugees. And I ended up running for office. I lost. But as part of that experience, I saw the gender divide in technology and felt like, these jobs were the way to march up into the middle class, and that if you could create an army of girl coders, like they could change the world.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on losing, because that means you're not up at night wondering whether or not Fox or MSNBC or CNN is tearing you apart nonstop. It's a different world than it even used to be. Well, I don't even know if it was ever a good world, but a different world for politics than it used to be just a few years ago. So dive in a little bit further into Girls Who Code. What is it? What does it do? What inspired you to really start the organization to help change the world?
Yeah, so our goal is to get to gender parity in the technology workforce. So essentially right now, less than 20% of those in the technology workforce are female, right? And if you think about the history of women in coding and in technology, we weren't always unrepresented, right? The world's first programmer, Ada Lovelace, was a woman in the 1980s. If you walked into any computer science class in the country, it pretty much would have been 40, 45% women. So, it's interesting, like at a time where technology has become everything about the way that we live and work, you've seen this enormous decline of women. And that is also happening at a time where today America is more reliant on women to be the breadwinners in families, right? To put food on the table, to pay for the mortgage. And we're not part of this industry. So I think you have two really powerful things that are happening. And so, what I said in 2012 was, how can we get generations of girls to be interested in coding at a young age and then decide to pursue this as a profession? And at that time, less than 1 out of 10 high schools offered computer science. So I thought that the best way to really change girls' interest was to basically offer a summer program, right, that allowed them to build and create things and help them solve problems, and then start launching kind of after school programs. So what we've done is we have about 80 summer programs that we run across the country. Where essentially we build a classroom in a technology company. So Google, Sephora, Apple, Microsoft, Bank of America, right? You name it, from financial services to fashion to traditional tech. You have like 20 girls learning how to code over the summer. And then we have about 10,000 Girls Who Code clubs for middle school kids on up that are happening all across the country. And what we've found essentially 7 years later is that it's happening, it's working. Like, the numbers of women that are choosing computer science as a major in college has dramatically changed. We're going to be sharing that data later this year. And we really believe that at the rate we're growing, at the rate we're converting women into this field that we can close the gender gap by 2027. And that's my mission.
Well, and it's fantastic. I remember I started out early on in recruiting and then moved into marketing technology. But I remember back in the late 90s when everybody was coming over for Y2K, especially. And that's a generation ago, but still, a lot of those people are in power positions now. But it wasn't that 9 out of 10 were male. It was probably that about 99 out of 100 seemed to be male. There were so
Mm.
few coders that were not white males, in their late 40s to 50s, or young Indians,
Yep.
from India that were in their 20s and 30s. And that was such a normal group that you very rarely, I mean, it really stood out like a unicorn when you would see a young woman come over who was, say, an Oracle DBA. I'm glad that we've progressed somewhat, but to your point, that we're missing a lot of opportunity now that's out there. And you wrote the New York Times bestseller Girls Who Code. Why do you think that message resonated so well just a few years ago?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that it's so funny because like a book is super analog in many ways, but what was happening is that I was in so many parts of the country, whether it was in rural or in urban centers, where the kids didn't have Wi-Fi at home or in the schools.
Hmm.
And so how were they going to learn computational thinking? And in many ways, so I wanted to write the book as a way, and I looked, I was like, wow, there's nothing out there. There's nothing there to teach a girl how to code in a book format.
Sure.
And so the book was a way to really close the gap there. And listen, I think that parents get that their kids got to learn this. They may not know exactly what it is, but they know that there's all these opportunities that are out there, right? And their kids have to learn. And so, we're really kind of in this moment where, I think people, when I started 7 years ago, people were like, what's coding?
Yeah.
Right? No one even knew. So now I think people get it. I just don't think that they have the same amount of intensity, right? About like, we got to figure out how to get every kid to learn how to code, to learn how to computationally think, and we got to do this fast because every day that goes by, innovations are being made, algorithms are being written, data sets are being gathered, right? And they're not gathered by the entire population of people who look like the entire population. And so there's a lot of bias, that is already being built into the system. There are a lot of products that are coming out that, quite frankly, don't serve the entire population. There's a lot of innovations that are not being made, right? Because we don't have women and people of color as part of our tech workforce. And so I come at it from a very much like, like for lack of a better word, like panic, right? Like we got
Hmm.
to do this now. And it's happening, but it's not happening at the speed I want it to. But that's another conversation.
Sure, sure. Well, so speaking of all over the country, I saw you at an airport after we both spoke at a digital summit, and I overheard you talking about speaking over 200 times this year. And that alone must be overwhelming. I know I was just telling somebody that I've been speaking 7 out of the last 8 weeks, and that's, exhausting and tiring with travel, but that's probably more like what you do 7 out of the last 8 days. How do you
Yeah.
juggle all of those speaking engagements while still trying to balance your family life and sanity and just some Reshma time?
Yeah, it was hard, right? And I was really bad at it, I think years ago, where I was like getting up at 6, doing a call on the way to the airport, you know what I mean? Working
Yeah.
while I was on the plane, getting off the plane, getting on 10 calls, you know what I mean? Then doing my speech, like, and it was just like I was just exhausted, angry, bitter. And so I've really started, like, when I'm traveling, I am fully focused on traveling. I'm not trying to do 90 work calls, or I'm not having my assistant schedule conference calls in between. So you know what, I kind of, I'm able to sleep if I want to sleep, I'm able to watch a movie if I
Yeah.
want to watch a movie, I'm able to actually be present. The other, I mean, and I've done like small wellness hacks, like I started wearing compression socks,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? I started just being really conscious about what I was eating. I made sure to put in a workout, right? Either but right before, I get in a little bit early so I can get to the gym and get a workout in. I stopped doing as many red eyes, right? Unless it was like totally mandatory.
Hmm.
So I've tried to put some kind of wellness around it, and it's really helped me.
It's so hard to eat right on the road. um,
It's
with
really hard
traveling.
to eat right on the road.
There's
Yeah, because you're kind of like, I deserve this cookie or I deserve this
exactly,
pizza, right?
exactly.
Because I'm working so hard.
So I
Yeah,
heard.
the other thing,
Go
yeah,
ahead. No, keep
sorry, I was
going.
gonna say, sure. I don't know if you figured this out, but like it feels like if you're trying to build a movement, if you're trying to
Yeah,
get a message out, it feels like it's just really hard to not travel. So if
absolutely.
anybody out
Feels
there
like a
who's listening
sacrifice
has
you're willing to make.
right has some hack on this, please let me know.
Yeah, really. I heard you speak at several of the digital summits this year. It's a large, great audience that I think resonates well with Brave Not Perfect. What's been your experience with that conference group as well?
I've had it's been amazing
Yeah,
because I think part of what we're talking about is a lot of culture change work, right? And
absolutely.
I think culture change is what kind of helps movements move faster.
Yeah,
And so I think it's people who really get it, and I think it's been a really smart audience. So I've really enjoyed it, which is why we've done a ton of them.
agreed. Yeah, and they told me, I mean, when I was there at one of the sessions, they told me that if I had daughters, then I would definitely love the book, and I read it anyway, not having daughters, and I still thought it was fantastic. So,
Yeah. It's yeah.
keep going.
No, I was saying that a lot of men have really been moved by it.
Absolutely.
And I got to do a speech, right, at a summit, with some really powerful Fortune 100 CEOs, and I think part of it is too is like it's understanding the way that women think,
Yeah,
right? And I think for a lot of folks, like, oh, I didn't get that was happening,
agreed.
you
So,
know.
after writing Girls Who Code, what really inspired you to do a little bit of a twist with this amazing book, Brave Not Perfect?
Well, listen, I have been working on issues about women and girls since I was 13,
Hmm.
and when I look at the leadership numbers of women, when I was, 14, 15, 16 to today, not much has changed. And I really wanted to understand, okay, as we continue to think about fighting sexism and racism, what are other strategies that we need to learn, you know what I mean, as women, to help kind of move things along. And one of the things that I really saw with my girls is a lot of my kids came to learning how to code and had this mentality that I just can't do it. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. You know what I mean? My mindset is fixed. And when they learned how to code and they learned how to make mistakes, and they learned how to fail, and they learned how to iterate, it not only just taught them how to code, but they're like, wait, what are the other things, right? That I've told myself that I cannot do, right? That maybe I could do now. And that was the aha moment about bravery, right? And how bravery is really the antidote to perfectionism. And that if you could unlearn perfectionism, the world can change because behind so many of the things that I think hold us back as women is the fact that we've been socialized to be perfect. We've been socialized to put other people's feelings first. We've been socialized to be nice, to be quiet. You know what I mean? And in ways that I think puts our own dreams, our own health at risk.
Do you find that this is the opposite with most men? And the reason I ask this way is I find that a lot of younger generations struggle with this, not just women. I would agree that more women struggle through this, but maybe I get to a point as an old man in my when I was I was a millennial 75 years ago, but I don't see bravery uh, maybe through the same lens as a problem. I see it resonating with both sides, and I'm just curious if you see that as well, or if it's am I missing something and it's so significantly different for a woman today?
Well, I think the definition of bravery is different for men and for women, right? And
Yeah,
and part of it to me, the bravery is very connected to the perfectionism. So
sure.
I think that the way that you learn how to be imperfect is you do brave things. So let me give you an example, right? I think oftentimes if I were to ask you, well, what does bravery mean, right? For some people, it's like, oh, it's saving a baby from a burning building. It's something physical,
Hmm.
right? Something like even the way that we define courage. But for women, a lot of times when we think about bravery in our life, like we think about when we're walking down the street and someone bumps into you, and instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, you say, excuse me, right? The amount of times we apologize, right, in a day, you know, the bravery to go to a doctor's appointment. Like, I think about this in my own family, right? My needs are at the bottom, right? Even my dog, right, has priority
Sure.
in our family over me. And so sometimes, like, bravery for me and my family has meant going to the gym at 7:30 in the morning at a time when the dog wants to go out and the baby's getting up, and it's the most inconvenient time for the family, you know what I mean? But the best time for me. And so the courage for Reshma is going to the gym at 7:30, right? So part of this is just definitional, right? And I think that there is a what may be brave to us, you're like, oh, I would totally do that. Like, I don't even think about that. But for us, it's different.
So funny because people ask me all the time if I get nervous or scared about public speaking, and I kind of think about a bravery mindset. I usually tell them no. I enjoy going swimming with sharks, literally.
Yeah.
For me, standing up and having a bunch of strangers look at you doesn't really bother me in the same way. But I'm sure you probably have seen that progress over your own speaking career as well. After 200 speeches in 1 year alone, and I know you've been doing this
Yeah.
for some time. This is probably like second hat, and people don't
But I
realize
forget.
how strong you are.
Yeah, I mean, I was even thinking, Shark, about your comfortability in giving me feedback when we were at the airport,
Yeah.
right? For a lot of women, they would never do
Oh
that,
my God.
ever, ever. But like, I was so grateful for it because, I felt the same thing when you told me that, right? I was like, yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. So, I mean, not only was it validating, but it allowed me to get, to change things for the next time that I speak there, right? And
Yeah.
so it allowed me to iterate. And I think that that is so important.
Well, and I appreciate you not being mad at me for making
No, I was
saying
grateful.
anything because I genuinely thought the session was fantastic and the book was fantastic. So for whatever it was worth, I was trying to add a pointer, not a criticism. So thank you for not destroying me on social media or anything like a lot of people would
Are
have
you
done.
kidding me? I was so grateful for it. But this is kind of this is part of what I talk about in the book, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have to look for opportunities for to get that feedback or for people to feel comfortable telling us that. Like, and I was doing this, like, I employ, a lot of young folks. And for a while, I wouldn't give clear feedback because I didn't want to hurt their feelings.
Yes.
And then I realized, like, wow, like, I'm not helping you in your career. Like, I'm actually, I'm doing a disservice to you. But I also realized that, so for so many people, they never had that in their lives. They didn't have somebody who gave them critical feedback. And so it feels personal. And so I always say to people, like, look for rejection, look for critical feedback, because that's how you build your resiliency and that's how you build that muscle. You know what I mean? And that's
Agreed.
the only way you get better. It's the only way you get better.
Then how do you go about helping someone create a bravery mindset?
So I think that your bravery mindset is like building a muscle, right? You have to continue to exercise it and to build it. So I feel like I've been building mine for years. So when I engage, so I'm not as held back by perfectionism, but that doesn't mean that I don't get like reeled back in, right? And I don't fall on and off the wagon. In many ways, I feel like building your bravery muscle is like weight loss, right? Or getting in shape, right? You're really good one week, you're hitting the gym, you're eating right, and then you like fall off the wagon.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to keep practicing and exercising that muscle. And couple of the tactics that I talk about in the book, like, one is like, you can't be brave if you're tired. Like, you will never
Yeah.
pick the braver, you know this, right?
Yeah.
You'll never pick the braver choice if you're exhausted, if you've been traveling for weeks or you haven't been sleeping and you haven't been eating right. And so getting your wellness routine right is really important to help you make the braver choice.
How should somebody go about redefining what bravery is today to them?
Well, I think that people have to start thinking about, like, one of the things I talk about is like, what are you afraid of? Like, what's the thing that you feel like, and we all know that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And part of being afraid is like, what is the thing that we want more than anything else? And I call that your ledge, right? So for me, it's running for office, right? That was always my dream. I've run twice, I've lost twice, and people always ask me, "Are you running?" And I sometimes find an excuse that I think is honest. You know what I mean? I sometimes am just have to say to myself, "Well, are you saying no because you're scared?" And I think people have to figure out what that thing is for them, and start living their truth. I mean, a lot of us, look, a lot of women and men too, like we stay in jobs that we're over. We stay in relationships that we know that are done. And we live a life with a lot of regret and a lot of envy. And I think that that to me is like how you start by identifying that and what that thing is for you is how you start building your bravery mindset. And I also think it's about taking a step back and thinking about, you know, what does everyday bravery mean? So for you on a day-to-day basis, what are the things that you do? Whether it's not raising your hand in a meeting when you have something to say, right? When it's volunteering to bake cookies for the Christmas cookie, holiday party that you don't have time for, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's not, putting off that doctor's appointment. Oftentimes it's those everyday acts, right? Where we know we're not putting ourselves first, when we know that we're basically not kind of entering life with courage, that make that that we're so hard on ourselves about. So how do you start how do you start like addressing those things and approaching them differently?
Are there any tips or tricks for women
Yeah.
to start using to help building this mindset and becoming braver?
Yeah, so one, pick something for you and pick it at a time that's the most inconvenient for everybody else,
Great.
because
Mhm.
then you'll learn how to put yourself first. Second, practice imperfection. One of the things I tell women to do is send an email with a typo in it. And everybody's like, what? That's
Mhm.
crazy, right? But we spend a lot of time on our emails. Three, find something that you will probably suck at, but you've always wanted to do.
Mhm.
So, like for me, it's surfing, right? When I look at people surfing, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But I can't swim, right? I'm terrified of cold water. And every summer, starting last year, I take a couple surfing lessons, and it's painful. I'm like pulling that surfboard out into the beach. There's like a 5-year-old doing stand next to me,
Mhm.
and I barely get my feet up on the board. But you know what? Like when I leave that beach, I feel so damn alive. And so I want women to find that thing for you. And what I have found is that when you start exercising a little bit of courage in these hobbies, right, and in these activities, it translates into your professional and personal life.
Agreed. So, another part of when I read this book, I thought was important, not just for the people who maybe want to become braver, but how do managers, especially, whether they're men or women, how do they help enable, for lack of a better phrase, women to become braver without necessarily being patronizing in the workplace? Because I think that's really important for anybody who's being a mentor, a manager, a parent, whatever, to try to help them without necessarily being patronizing.
Right. Well, the first thing is, listen, it's not crazy that women are more risk averse because we're penalized for failure in ways that men aren't. Right. So if you look at school, Black girls are, punished in school at a much higher rate than anybody else for the exact same act, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
look at women in the law, women are disbarred at twice the rate of men for the same violation. Same thing with finance. So what I say to male managers and female managers is, are you evaluating women for failure in the same way? And you got to really dig deep when those promotions and those performance reviews come, and really ask yourself that question. And like, because I do think that we have biased, you know what I mean, against women for imperfection, and for failure. And so look at that. I think the second thing is, I always say ask more than once, because oftentimes, let's just say you have this amazing woman, she is ready for that promotion, she's ready for that next step, you offer it to her and she's like, I don't know, let me think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is she's going home and thinking about, wow, can I do this perfectly? Whereas oftentimes, like, men are kind of faking it till they make it, right? They're like, great, sign me up. They may have no experience, no ability, no opportunity, but they're ready to take on that challenge. And so I always say to male and female managers, ask more than once. Ask more than once, right? And the third thing is, goes back to the point what we were just talking about, is like, don't be afraid to give real feedback, right? Like, I love Serena Williams, and Serena Williams literally lives at the edge of her ability, and a coach who's telling her, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again,
Yeah.
right? If you don't have that, right? If you don't have that in your life, you can't get better.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes we shy away from giving real feedback.
Couldn't agree more. You have a son. I know you mentioned on your book jacket as well, but you have a son, and I would love to know your advice to parents and anyone else as to how to help your own children and the
Yeah.
youth progress to where you want them to be as well, but where we'd like everybody to see people treat better. What are the things you're trying to teach your own child to
Yeah.
to be a better person to help support women more, men and women?
Well, listen, well, first, I'm trying to let my son be my son. And if you meet my son, he's like a little Gandhi. He is like careful and cautious. He's not jumping off any monkey bars. And
Right.
listen, everyone's trying to man him up. And so a lot of what I do is just like let him be him. And so I think that's the first thing, whether they're boys or girls, just let them be who they are and stop trying to put them into gender boxes. The second thing with Sean is Sean, I bring him everywhere. He will sit there in an auditorium, in a stadium and just listen and watch me speak. He thinks all leaders are women. He is like surrounded by strong feminist women. And, we always think about like, okay, we got to bring our daughters to work. Well, we got to bring our sons to work too.
Yeah.
And they got to see us lead. And I think that his whole, perspective, like we'll go to the toy store and we'll be like, can we buy, Captain Marvel, And so it's like, he is digging, strong women. I've really worked on that.
I bet that puts a lot of pressure on your husband, when he sees his mom speaking to 1,000 people and his dad, picks him up from school in a Volvo. So what'd you do
Well,
today? Well,
listen,
nothing. Well,
you
mom
know.
spoke to 1,000 people at a conference.
No, well, I listen, that's the other thing. I have a husband who believes in me more than I believe in myself and is completely not threatened. He's in venture capital. He's a badass in his own right.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons why he fell in love with me is because um he knows that like what I was put on this earth to do. It's funny, I was speaking at a conference a couple of weeks ago. I bring my dad, like when I go to Chicago, I always bring my dad. And this woman came up to my father and she kind of grabbed his hand and she said, she doesn't belong to you. She belongs to us. And thank you so much for sharing her with us. And it was so powerful. But whether it's my father, whether it's my husband, whether it's my son, I think everybody kind of gets that and they really support me.
So who else out there in the world, the people that have helped teach you, who inspires you to be brave other than your family? I mean, who are the leaders that you've seen over your time? I was thinking back to a time when Charles Barkley, became even more famous when he said, "I'm not your mentor, but who are the people that inspired you to become what you've become today?"
Well, I always love watching women who use their platform to lift other women up, and to fight for something. So whether that is Hillary Clinton, whether that is, Megan Rapinoe, whether that is Melinda Gates, Oprah Winfrey or Serena Williams, like it's Michelle Obama, it's watching women who have achieved something in life, but they're using their platform to uplift others. And and to me, that is the biggest form of kind of compassion and humility and power. And quite frankly, I want to see men, and I think we're starting to see men do the same. I say to men like, don't support women's issues for brand cover. Do it because you believe
Exactly.
in it. And when people see men do that, they will follow them.
Agreed. Yeah, that's the same reason I asked about managers, and people and mentors helping support women is don't be patronizing in it. So, Reshma, you said you have enjoyed learning to surf, and you know that I'm a big shark. So, I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite kind of shark and why? This has probably never come up in any of your presentations anywhere.
Oh my God. Well, I would say it's probably a hammerhead shark because my son loves hammerhead sharks and my son loves sharks,
Yeah.
by the
Oh,
way.
yeah.
So we have been to like every aquarium, everything. And there's this really awesome hammerhead shark that he loves in the San Francisco aquarium. So
Oh,
that's my answer.
it's a fantastic aquarium. Reshma, are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Being a best-selling author or being a multi-hundred times a year speaker?
Oh my, you're asking me to pick between the two?
Yes, ma'am.
The speaker.
Why so?
I feel like I don't know. I think that there's something about being able to speak to so many different people from different walks of life that is just I've seen that's just like I've seen the power of it in being able to kind of move the movement. I mean, it's like picking between my two favorites in the
Yeah,
sense of
yeah,
like, but it's the same thing with the book,
yeah. It's
right? Like
Sophie's
I've seen
choice.
the book, been able. It's yeah. So that's a hard one.
All right, number 2, police or fire?
Meaning, like, what would I rather be?
Which one do you like better? It'll
I
make
get
total sense when I tell you why.
fire.
Yes, because it's the bravest.
Yeah.
Well, brave, not perfect. It's a stretch, I know, but I didn't have a lot to go on. Number 3, Mars or Venus?
Ooh, Mars.
But that's where men are from.
Mm. Where I feel like I'm will maybe get a chance to go to.
Yeah, there you go. Number 4, brave or perfect?
Brave.
Good answer. Number 5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
Good. Reshma, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find out more about you, get a copy of the book, follow
Yes.
your speaking engagements, and more?
Go to bravenotperfect.com and learn, videos, learn about my bravery bulletin, learn about my Brave Not Perfect podcast, get a book, like all things Brave Not Perfect are on bravenotperfect.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reshma, for speaking with us
Thanks,
today
Shark.
on A
It
Shark's
was wonderful
Perspective.
talking to you. Thank you.
So there was my conversation with Reshma Saujani, the author of the international bestseller Brave Not Perfect, the founder and CEO of Girls Who Code, as well as the author of the New York Times bestseller Girls Who Code, Learn to Code and Change the World. She's been named by Forbes as one of the most powerful women changing the world, and she's also a TED Talk speaker. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, she talks about bravery being the antidote to perfection. She says that women have been socialized to be perfect, and that causes people to sometimes react differently. I applaud her when she talks about how some conversations can be helpful rather than automatically being considered as criticism. She talks about this in that a lot of people take criticism too often the wrong way, like it's an attack. She looks at it as a way to build a brave muscle, and I've always been known for being blunt. But one day, Reshma and I ran into each other again at the airport after speaking at the same conference. She's a really good speaker, but after she did her presentation, they also stuck her with this dork in a fireside chat, and he really brought the session down, for lack of a better description. As my blunt, large foot so often fits in my mouth, I told her my thoughts because I thought she was awesome, but that she needed a better fireside chat and why and how. She didn't take it as negative criticism, but as positive feedback that fueled her. And a lot of people wouldn't have been so receptive. So at some point, I may be writing blunt for dummies, but what I really appreciated was that she doesn't look at critique necessarily as criticism. Obviously, if delivered in the right way, and granted, I was much nicer in my conversation with her than I'm probably talking about here now, because I'm a big fan of hers. I want her to continue to get her word out as she is doing so well with now. She simply made the point that the critique isn't reason to cower. She doesn't have to be perfect. Reshma is incredibly brave, and brave enough against a shark like me. Second, look, I don't pretend to be able to tell women what to do to be brave or to think differently. I mean, my advice would be to jump in the water where sharks don't care what gender you are, but I don't pretend to truly understand what the female gender goes through and how it makes them feel. However, I do have empathy, and I understand what Reshma says. I understand her points, and that's why, as a man, I appreciated her book so much. If it helps create any empathy in you with understanding how others feel, then great. read the book. I believe it will help you, whether you're a man or a woman, parent or manager or anything else. With any good book or speaker, if you can learn better how to understand how other people feel, whether it's gender, age, race, or whatever, then pay attention. It's worth a better informed perspective. Ultimately, it's how well you understand and get along with other people in your job or life. Third, fear has never been much of a distraction for me in any form. I'm the guy that laughs in the theater at scary movies, and I'm the guy who runs into the water when people yell shark. Chalk that up more to ignorance than bravery, but it's just who I am. But I understand as well, having talked to so many people, especially women, who have fear hold them back. Regardless, you've got to develop a bravery mindset. Reshma gives some great advice here on dealing with fear. First, identify what that thing is for you that's holding you back, and that's how you start with building your bravery mindset. As she said, a lot of times, it's those day-to-day things that we fall into but don't approach differently. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you for the privilege of your time. Don't be afraid. Be brave and jump into the water with me, and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.